In this video, we're walking through 10 beginner JavaScript coding challenges, and we're going to do that on the Code Wars website. Now, this video is part of my Full Stack Web Developer Roadmap series, where I kind of take you from complete beginner to deploying your first full stack web application. If you want to know more about that, there's something in the description you can click or this video up here. Anyways, we've done practice problems in previous lessons. We did 25 of them. It took over 2 hours to do. And you can check out this video to go to those. Those will be a little bit easier for you. But now in the previous lesson, or lesson 6, I guess it's this lesson, we went through a lot of the built-in objects and then the associated functions for those objects within JavaScript. So we have a much broader understanding of what's available to us, and therefore we'll be a lot better at solving these challenges. So I'm going to walk through each of them. I recommend that you try them out first on your own, and then you can go through my solution. We'll kind of look at some community members' solutions as well. Now, in the previous code challenge video where I did 25 of them, I didn't zoom in, so I made sure to have a nice big screen that you can see. That was a little bit annoying to actually edit that video, so hopefully this will work out better. But anyways, go to the link in the description to get to the collection we're going to be working on. So this is my profile on Code Wars, and if you go to my profile, or no, this isn't my profile. If you go to my profile here, you can come down and you can see the collections, and you can see that for lesson 5 we did 25 problems, and then for lesson 6 we have some challenges. And once you get here, you can click on the Train Now button, which is going to take you into all of these problems that I've laid out for you here on the right, and there's 10 of them. So we'll go ahead and click Train Now, which is going to basically put us in this list and keep us there when we press, next kata or whatever that's called. I think it's something that has to do with jiu-jitsu. I didn't know in the previous video, but I think I learned since then. Again, leave it in the comments if you know totally what it means. Anyways, let's get started with our first code challenge, which is going to be list filtering. Now, if you remember from the previous couple of videos, we went through the built-in methods, and one of those was the filter method on an array. So in this case, I would guess that we're probably going to be using that to solve this problem. Now, I haven't seen any of these, or I've seen them, I picked them, but I haven't tried to solve any of these, so we're going to be going in real time. But I think the filter method's probably going to be what we want here. So it says, in this kata, you will create a function that takes a list of non-negative integers and strings and returns a new list with the strings filtered out. So this is a perfect use of our filter method. We'll go here, and as we always do, let's change our parameter name so it's more descriptive. So we'll call this num list, or even better, num array. And what we have to do is basically return num array, and then we want to add the filter method on the end of that. And the filter method, as you might remember, is going to basically take a callback function, and whatever that callback function returns, if it returns true on the individual element that we're looping through, then it's going to keep that in the array. If it returns false, then it's going to throw it out and not include it in the resultant array. So just for the sake of clarity, I'm going to actually break this out into a separate function, and then we'll refactor it so that it's a little bit more concise. So we'll say our callback function is going to take an array item. So that's how all of these methods on the arrays work. They pass in the array item to the callback, and then we're going to return a condition. So in this case, we want to look and see if we have a non-negative integer. So any negative number or string is something that we need to filter out. So we'll say, first off, if the type of array item, which is going to return us with the type of the variable, if that is not equal to a number, which we actually have to put in quotes. So let's go to our little playground here, and if we have a number, something like this, and we say type of 20, it's going to give us number in quotes. and then if we put in some sort of string, it's going to give us string. So we're using that knowledge, and we're saying if the array item does not equal number, then we want to filter it out. And then we also want to add a condition. We can say if it's not a number, or with these two pipes, or if the array item is negative. So how do we figure out if a number is negative? Well, we could just multiply it by -1, and if that turns out to be positive, that's the case, but we could also do something else. So in our callback function, we need to return either true or false, which will determine whether this individual array item that we're looping over will be returned in that final array. So in this case, we have two conditions. So we'll put this in a comment. We'll say our first condition is that it is a number. Our second condition is it is positive. So all we have to say is if the array item is greater or equal to 0, and the type of the array item is equal to number, then we want to return true. Otherwise, we return false here and exclude it. So this little type of operator, we've looked at it before a couple of times. Just to show you what I'm talking about, I have up here, if we say type of string, or put a string in there, it's going to return the value of string, but if we put in, say, a number, it's going to give us number. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm saying if the type of the item is equal to number, then we want to keep it. All right, so there's our callback function. This should work, and all we would have to do is say return numarray dot filter, and then we pass in our callback function, and let's see if that works when we test it. So it does work, but there's a couple ways we can refactor this. The first way is that we don't need this conditional. All we have to do, really, is return this expression right here, which if this expression evaluates to true, we want to keep it, and if it evaluates to false, we want to throw it away. So if we just return the expression, it should work just the same. Now, another way we can refactor this is by taking this entire callback function and simplifying it. So instead of passing it in as a declaration or whatever, we can just define it right here. So we can say array item and then use an arrow function to actually return this. So let's break down onto the new line, and we will return this expression right here. And then we can get rid of this second function, test it again, and we should pass it. Now the last thing that we can do, we don't even need these little brackets here. We can get rid of those and get rid of the return statement, because if we put it all on one line, it should work just fine. So let's go ahead and test that. Looks like we got some sort of syntax error. Yeah, we have this little semicolon at the end, which is not valid. So let's go ahead and test it now, and we're passing it. So that's how you might take this and refactor it to work correctly. Let's attempt the solution, and we pass them all. So we solved this one just okay. So we'll submit it and see what other people have used to solve this solution. All right, let's go down here and let's see. This one did something very similar to us. Looks like they're saying if this is equal to number. So I don't know if they accounted for negative numbers, but maybe there's something about this that does. Down here, let's see. Well, maybe I misread this actually. So I wonder what the instructions were. Maybe go back and see. I guess maybe we didn't need to look for non-negative numbers. I don't know. All right, let's move on. It's not super important. You can go back and kind of look at that on your own. All right, our next challenge is array.diff. So probably getting the difference of an array of some sort. So let's go into the instructions. It says your goal in this kata is to implement a difference function which subtracts one list from another and returns the result. It should remove all values from list A which are present in list B. Okay, so looking at this, we see that 1 is in both of these arrays, so it's going to remove that and leave us with an array of 2. In this one, we have 2 present in both arrays, so we're going to remove that 2 and we're left with 1 and 3, which gives us our result. So that's basically how this is working, and hopefully we can use one of our built-in methods to solve this. So just a fun fact, if you go to the Lodash library, this is something I talked about in a prior lesson, or not a prior lesson, in this lesson in a prior video. You can go to the documentation and there's actually a method here. So we can go to the intersection. The intersection method is going to find what is alike within the arrays, but we're trying to find the difference. So we can go to the difference method right here. So ultimately our challenge is to implement this method, which we can use in Lodash. It's very just kind of an interesting thing to know, and if you start using the Lodash library like we might do kind of later in this series, it will come in handy for this reason. So what we're trying to do is find the difference, and I think the way that we can do this is by using the array.includes method. Let me pull up the MDN documentation. So we'll go to the web docs, go to JavaScript, go to built-in objects, click array, and now we can go down to the includes method, which we talked about in a prior video in this lesson. So this is basically going to figure out if something is included in another array, or if a value is included in another array. So if we were to loop through one of these arrays and then ask, is each value included in the other, and if so, just remove it, then that might help us solve this problem. The first thing I want to do is check for the edge cases. So if you see in the test down here, there's a couple times where the first array might be nothing, or the second array is nothing. And in those cases, we just have to return whatever is in the other array. So let's say that if a.length is equal to 0, then we want to return b. So we want to return the other array. And then we'll say if b.length is 0, then we want to return a. And let's go ahead and test that to see if we got a couple of them right. And you see that we passed one of the tests because it passed in as an argument an empty array. So now we have to actually solve the question of how do we get that intersection and figure out what is actually different between the two arrays. So I'm just going to open this up here to full screen, and then maybe we can put in an example just so that we're anchored to something. So let's put in something like 3, 5, 6, 6, 5, and 2. And then the second array will be something like 3 and 6. So we know that we want to have in the final array, we want 5, 5, and 2. So let's see how we can actually solve that. So what I think we should do is loop through this, one of the arrays. So we'll say a.forEach, and then we have to pass in our callback function, which will do something on each iteration. So we'll say array item, and then we also probably want to grab the array index, and I'll show you why in just a second. So let's drop down into our function here, and this needs to be stored in a result. We could also just return it, but we'll store that in a result, and then we'll return the result at the end of the function. So every time we iterate through this, we're going to actually use each item, check if it exists in the other array, and if it does exist, we're going to remove that item from both of the arrays in each iteration of the loop. In order to do that, we need something that removes an item at a specific index of an array. So let's go on to the documentation and just refresh ourselves on this method called splice. Now this is something we talked about in a prior video of this lesson, but this is going to change the contents of an array by removing or replacing existing elements. So we can remove an element at a start index, and then we can, that's kind of how we're going to solve this. So we'll say that if the array item, or actually let's say we're iterating through array called A, so if B, so the other array, includes the array item, if that includes the array item, then we want to remove it. So I'm going to put some comments here. We have found this element in both arrays. So we know that we need to remove that. So how do we do that? Well, we have to probably get a new array for each of these, and then now we're going to be working with that as that most recent array. So let's make a variable up here for, we'll say current array A, and we'll just set that equal to, I don't know, we'll put a placeholder in there called null, and then we'll say let current array B equal null. So that will be the placeholder that we're going to assign these if we have mutated the array. So now what we want to do is create two separate arrays. So we'll say new A, and then we'll come down here. I'm not done with this yet, but we'll say new B. So we're going to grab two arrays that have these values removed from them. And the way that we do that is basically by saying a.filter. So we're going to use the filter method. And then I'm just going to pass in the name of the item as item, because we don't want to conflict with this right here that we've used in kind of the parent callback that we're using. And then let's go ahead and return this so long as this item that we're looping through does not equal the array item that we want to remove. So as long as item does not equal array item, we want to put that into the new array, and we can actually use this same syntax down here. We just need to replace A with B. So this will be the new array for each of them, and all we have to do here is replace this with our placeholder. So current array A, and I'm actually going to just call this new A just for simplicity, and then new B, and we'll change that here, so new A and new B. And so now each time basically what we're doing so far here is we're looping through every element within the A array, and then we're going to basically create a new array for both of them with only the elements that have not been matched across both of them. So let's see what this is returning. I'll exit out of here. Let's just test it. Looks like we've got something going on here. So let's go ahead and print what the result is before we actually return it. So let's print the result and see what we're getting. So a big mistake that I made that I just realized is that I'm actually modifying the original arrays, and we don't want to do that because that's basically saying, okay, we're looping through through this array, but within the loop we're actually modifying it at the same time, and we definitely do not want to do that. So let's open up the code block once more, and now what we need to do is we need to get a copy of each of them. So we'll say a copy is going to be equal to a.slice, which is just going to create a copy of that array, and then b copy is b.slice. So that's just going to give us two copies of the array. And now what we're going to say is instead of a.filter and b.filter, we're going to do the a copy and the b copy. And that's how we're going to sort through these. Let's go ahead and test that and see if it gets us an answer here. So looks like we're getting undefined for our result, and I wonder why that's happening. So let's see. Oh, that's because, okay, I'm just not thinking here. So we're not going to assign the for loop to a value because it doesn't return an array. It just loops through it, doesn't really return anything, so returning the result is going to not work. So what we need to do is just return either one of these, I believe. So let's see what happens if we console log new A and then maybe return it. Okay, so we're passing more of them now. Let's see. It looks like this sample test, it says if A is an empty array, then we want to return an empty array. So I think I messed that up here. Okay, so here we have the first one empty, so we want the result to be empty. So if a.length equals 0, then we just want to return an empty array rather than the b array. So let's test that. Looks like we passed all of them. Let's go ahead and attempt it. I'm not sure if this is going to pass. It looks like we got some problems if we have negative numbers maybe. Let's see what we're dealing with here. Okay, I think something that I'm doing wrong here is I'm taking a copy of the original array each time, but we probably want to take a copy of the new array that we've created. So each time it loops through, it's going to remove, one of the elements. But if we keep making a copy of the original array, we're going to keep adding back those ones that we removed already. So let's go ahead and instead of making a copy here, I'll expand this out. We'll make a copy of new A and new B. So this should represent the updated array. So how this is working, I just want to take a second to explain this. Let's say that we have the following example. So we have 1, 2, 2, and 3, and then maybe we have 2 and 3 or something like that. So what's going to happen is we start with array A, and we're going to loop through it with this for each loop. So we're saying, okay, we're going down into our code. New A is going to be equal to null to start, and we're going to be taking a copy of that, which is going to give us null. And then we're going to say if B includes the array item, so in this case the array item is going to be 1. So we're saying if this array, B, includes the value of 1, then we're going to drop into this code right here. And if that's the case, then we're going to take new A and we're going to filter it and set it equal to, or we're going to filter the copy and set it equal to new A. So we probably need to initialize this to be equal to the original array. So we'll say, we'll start it with A and then we'll start it with B there. So now we're starting with the original array, and each time we get down into the loop, we're going to take a copy of whatever has been updated. And each time in the loop, we're going to check, okay, is 1 included in this second array? Yes, it is. So now let's set new A, which was the original array at the beginning, but now we're going to filter out this item that we found in both of them. So now as we go through the second time, it's going to be removing elements. So in the first iteration of this loop, 1 is not found here, so we don't do anything. The second time that we come around, we look at 2, and we see that 2 is included in both of these arrays. So we are going to drop down into this if statement, and we're going to reassign these placeholder arrays with our filtered array that does not include the 2 anymore. So it's going to just have 1 and 3, and then 2 and 3. And then finally we get to the last one. After a couple iterations, we see it's in both, we remove that, and then we assign it to new A and new B. So let's see if this works a little bit better. Looks like we passed the easy ones, and then we passed all of them. So this was a tough question. Like if you look at the difficulty of it, it's 6 KYU, and I once again have not gone through this beforehand. Like I didn't know how to solve this problem before I looked at it. So hopefully that gives you a good idea of how thinking through this works. Like it takes a lot of iterations. It's not something where I'm just like, all right, we're going in and solving it. I know exactly how to do it. You have to try some things. You have to test it. You realize, oh, I didn't account for this, didn't account for that. And eventually you will get to the answer. So this was a really tough one. I would definitely not call this a beginner JavaScript problem, but hopefully you can see in our big solution here how we have used a bunch of different methods. So we used slice, we used filter, we used includes, and we used for each. We used all of these in the same problem, and that's how these built-in methods of JavaScript can really come in handy. And it looks like after solving that, since it was a tougher problem, looks like I have leveled up here. I started this Code Wars thing to make these videos, so that's why I'm not a little bit higher up. All right, enough notifications here. Let's go to the next problem. Looks like we have another tough one, 6 KYU. So let's see if we can solve this a little bit quicker than the first one that we did here. Okay, so let's look at some of the potential inputs. And at the bottom it says, note, all the hashes are pre-validated and will only contain uppercase and lowercase letters, a little dash, and it looks like a period. So that's all that we would expect to see. And then looking at the examples, you see we have a list of objects where each object has a property called name. And as we scroll over, okay, that's all that we're working with there. So in this case, Bart, Lisa, and Maggie. So it looks like we have to put a comma after the first one, probably a comma after the second one if there's more than 3. But in this case, there's 3, so you put the and instead of the comma. Okay. And then in this case where there is nothing in the array, so it's empty, we just return an empty string. So that's a really easy one to start with. I'm going to actually zoom out. This is a little bit zoomed in. I wanted people to be able to see everything, but in this case, we're running out of space. So let's go if the names.length equals 0, then we want to return an empty string. And if we test this, we should pass at least one of them for that empty array. So we did that. We got that test case covered. Now we have to actually go through each of these. So let's see how we can do that. We'll probably be iterating through the array with a for each loop, but let's see. Okay, let's try that. So we'll say names.forEach, and then we can say name will be the argument that we're dealing with. Let's put some parentheses in here because we're actually going to need the array index, which is the second argument of the for each callback. And again, if you wanted to see that, if you wanted to actually figure this out on your own, if you go to the for each method, so I go to Technologies, JavaScript, built-in objects, array, and then I go to the for each method, and then you can read all the syntax, and it says the callback is going to have these parameters right here. So it first passes in the current value, then the index of the array that we're looping through, and then the original array. So that's how I knew to add in the name and then the array index. And you could have just called this the array item to be a little bit more clear. So let's break this down onto a new line. All right, so we're looping through, and that's not going to return anything. So we'll probably need to store this in our final string, which will be equal to nothing to start. All right, so we'll loop through, and actually, if this array has a length of 0, then this for each loop is not going to do anything. So we probably could just return the final string, and instead of having this if statement up there, we'll just have this. So let's test that and make sure it works with that empty array, which it does. All right, so back to here. We're basically going to be grabbing the name property. So we'll say name is going to be equal to the array item.name, because we know that the array item is going to be an object, like right here, and it has a property called name. All right, so we have our name, and we just want to add that to the final string. So let's see. We need to first check if the array index does not equal the total names array dot length. So basically what we're saying is that if we're not on the last index of the array, then we want to do something. So if we're not on the last index of the array, we want to take our final string and we want to add the current array item name, which is stored in the name variable that we put right here. So that's going to just add the names, and then of course we need the comma. So we want to add the name. So let's just remove this equal sign, and then we'll say final string equals final string plus name, and then plus a comma and then a space. All right, so that's going to basically reassign that final string and add the names with the commas. So let's console.log the final string as we have it. It's definitely not going to be right, but we'll see what we're getting. Okay, so we have Bart, comma, Lisa, comma, Maggie, comma, Homer, comma, and Marge, comma. All right, so that's kind of what we're expecting here, but now we have to add in the and symbol. And you can see in the last one right here, we've put in a comma. So let's see what this one actually was passing in as a test. Okay, so one mistake that I made, if the array index is not equal to the names.length, remember the length of the array is going to be literally how many elements are in the array, but the array is 0 indexed. So we'll actually never reach the index that is equal to the length of the array, so we have to say the names.length minus 1. And if we test this, we should not see this output here. We should basically skip that one. So you see that we skipped marge this time, so that is actually correct. Now, we'll put an else condition in here, so otherwise, if it is kind of the last element of the array, so in here we'll put the final string will be equal to final string plus the and symbol, and then plus the name itself. All right, so I don't think this is going to work perfectly, but let's test it. Yeah, so we're seeing and marge without a space here. So all we need to do is add a space in there and test it. All right, so this looks a lot closer to what we're expecting. So what we're missing here, why it's failing, is because we still have this comma here, and when we have the and symbol, we don't want the comma at the end. So basically, this condition is not going to be correct. So we want to actually identify two different situations. We want to identify when we are on the second to last, and then when we're on the last one. So instead of saying not equal to, let's say equal to. So if the index that we're working with, let's go ahead and expand this a little bit. So if the index that we're working with is equal to the last one, that's when we're actually going to paste in this right here. So we want to put and name, okay? Otherwise, so else if the array index equals names.length minus 2, so the, I guess, third to last, we want to say the final string will be equal to final string plus the name, but we don't want any of the commas going on here. And then otherwise, we just want to return the final string will be equal to final string plus the name plus a comma and a space. So let's try this out and see what we're getting as output. You can see that we're getting a lot closer, so we have everything correct except we need a space right before the and symbol. So let's just add that real quick. Here's where we're doing and. Let's just put a space there and test it again. And now you can see that we're passing most of the test cases. Now we have one down here. It says wrong output for a single name. So if we have a single name, we probably need to just return the name itself. Okay, so we can just cover that in a separate test case. So we can say if the names.length is equal to 1, we're going to just return the names 0.name. So that should cover when we have a single name. So we passed all of them. Let's attempt it. And we passed all of them. So this was another really tough one. Probably not a beginner problem necessarily, but hopefully, again, you see how we're iterating through this and trying out different things until we get to the final solution. All right, so let's submit this one and go to the next. As you can see, someone solved it with the reduce method, which we learned about in the prior video of this lesson, but I didn't think of that, so that's a useful one. And basically, anytime that we're using like an accumulator, so in this case we had the variable called final string, so go back in the video to see that. If you have a accumulator variable followed by a for loop that modifies that, that's always a good use case for the reduce method. I didn't think about it in this particular scenario, but that's always a good use case. This one's very interesting. I'm not going to go through all of these, but be sure to look at them because people come up with some very clever solutions. All right, so let's look at this one. This again is a pretty tough one, so I guess we're getting all of the tough ones in a row, and then it's going to get a little bit easier here. So in this problem, it's basically, the name is take a 10-minute walk, and it's saying you live in this city, blah, 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 where the roads are laid out in a perfect grid, and you arrive 10 minutes early to an appointment, you want to go take a walk. You've got an app that generates a little route, and you can go either north, south, east, or west, and each unit is going to be a single block. All right, so we need to figure out if a given array of directions is going to put us back at our original destination, and it's going to take exactly 10 minutes, and it says that each block is going to take you 1 minute. So it takes you 1 minute to traverse one city block. So we're basically returning true if it does, false otherwise. And then it says, note, you'll always receive a valid array containing a random assortment of directional letters, and you're not going to receive anything other than north, south, east, or west. So in this case, I think I have an idea of how we might solve this just initially. So let's open this up and say the first condition. We know that if there's not exactly 10 elements in the array, it's going to take us more or less than 10 minutes. So we'll say if walk.length does not equal 10, we're going to return false. All right, so if it doesn't equal 10, we're returning false and not going to the rest of the code. If it does equal 10, then we'll go into the rest of the code and see if it gets us back in 10 minutes to our original destination. Now, in this case, I think what we're going to do is initialize 4 different variables. So we'll say north offset equals 0, west offset equals 0, and we're going to do this for all of the directions. So east offset and south offset. All right, so now we're going to loop through the array. So we're going to use the for each method, and we're going to pass in, instead of array item, let's start learning how to actually name our parameters to be a little bit more descriptive. So we'll say direction, which will represent the direction that we're going to receive, and then we'll go down into the for loop, and for each direction, we're going to set our variables offsets. So we'll use a switch case statement. So we're going to put in the direction in the switch statement, and then we're going to say case, if it equals n, then it's going to be north. All right, so we're going to put a break statement in there. If it is west, all right, and then we'll just put the cases for all of the other ones. We don't need that last break statement because it'll get there no matter what. Okay, so we're going through all of the different cases, and in each one we're going to change the offset. So if it is north, we're going to say the north offset is going to be plus or equal 10. All right, so that's just going to say, or not 10, we'll just say 1. So we've gone north 1 block if the case is north. And we're going to do that for all of these different cases. So we'll say west offset will be plus or equal 1. And then, let's see, east offset plus or equal 1. And then in the last case, we will say south offset plus or equal 1. So if we reach our destination, like if we get put back to our destination, then I think the sum of all of the offsets should net to 0. Or not the sum, you have to subtract them. So the north offset will offset the south one, and then west, and then east. So basically, if north minus south equals 0 and west minus east equals 0, then we know that we have returned to the original destination. So if we go down to the for loop here, we'll say if north offset minus south offset equals 0 and west offset minus east offset equals 0, then we will return true. Otherwise, we return false. Now, in all of these cases, you're going to start catching on that when we just return true in a conditional, oftentimes we can just return the expression itself. So let's copy that, and instead of this complicated block, let's just return the expression itself. All right, so let's break out of here and test it and see what happens. And we passed all of them, so my assumption was correct. You just calculate the offsets. They should net to 0 if you subtract them. And if the left and right offset is 0 and the top and bottom offset is 0, then you've returned to your office or your appointment. So let's attempt it, see if we covered all the cases, and we did. So awesome, let's submit it. Now this one I think was a little easier than the last two that we did, but still required a little bit of thinking, and I'm sure someone solved it in a much more efficient way. So when it loads, we'll see. All right, so the first solution here, pretty much the same thing that we did. So we did pretty good on this one. All right, once again, we have a 6 KYU, so might be a little bit tough, but let's jump in and see. It says write a function called persistence, right here, that takes in a positive parameter, num, and returns its multiplicative persistence, which is the number of times you must multiply the digits in num until you reach a single digit. So I don't understand this fully at first, but let's look at the examples. All right, so if we pass in 39, it says we do 3 times 9, which is going to be 27 right here, and then you do 2 times 7 will equal 14, and then 1 times 4 will equal 4, which is a single digit. Okay. Now, does it always do positive numbers? Okay, it says positive parameter. Okay, so we know it's going to be a positive number. So we know how to identify whether the solution is a single digit. We basically say, if it is less than 10, it's a single digit. Okay, so we're probably going to go in some sort of loop here to iterate over each new solution. And we might actually use something called recursion. I'm not sure about that yet, but we'll see. So let's see if this works. So we'll say, how do we get the individual pieces of this number though? So let's go, I can't actually remember if you can do this, but let's take a number like 299 and see if we can access individual pieces of it. Looks like you cannot. So we have to figure out how to get the first digit of each of the numbers. So in this case, I probably should know this, but I don't. And in the real world, this is what I would do. I would just open up a new tab and say find, or maybe not find, we'll say get first digit of a number in JavaScript. So this will work, get the second digit of a number. Okay, so looks like we're turning it into a string, grabbing the first digit, and then converting it to a number. Okay, so let's put a num equal to 299 and then say num to string. Okay, it gives us 299, and then we can grab the first piece of that, and then we will convert that to a number. Now there's a quick way to do this. You could just wrap it around with this number object, and it'll turn it back to a number. Or what you can do, this is a shortcut, you can just put a plus sign at the beginning and it automatically coerces it into a number. So this is the pattern that we're going to use. We're going to grab each of the digits of that number, and then we can see, multiply them together basically. So the thing I'm curious about is whether we have, okay, so if we have 3 digits here, we have to multiply all 3 of them. Okay, so that's good to know. So it could be up to maybe 4 or 5 or 6 digits. So we have to do this times that times that times that. So that's something we have to take into account here. Now, if it's already a 1-digit number, it says to return 0. So let's just say that first. We'll say if num is less than 10, which means it's a 1-digit number, we're going to return 0. And if we test that, we should get at least one of these correct. So if it passes in a 1-digit number, we got that correct. Okay, so the next part, let's see. So what I think we should do here is we should convert the number to a string, and then maybe instead of doing what I was showing you over here, converting it back to a number, maybe what we can do is take the string and put it into an array. So let's go ahead and do that. String version is going to be num.toString, and then from the string, what we know we can do is actually convert that to an array. So we'll say array version is going to be equal to the string version, and then let's see, I actually can't remember exactly what we used there. So let's go to the documentation and go to the string methods is what we're looking for. The reason we're looking for a string method is because we're trying to convert this string here into an array. So let's go to built-in objects, string down here, and then let's look through the methods. I know that there's a way that you can turn this into an array. Okay, so it should be the split method. Yep, that's what we need. I don't know why I couldn't think of that, but if we take a string, so let me just use an example. So you remember, we can actually write a string literal. So some string example, and then we can take that literal string and chain a method on top of it because it wraps it in the actual string object that has methods automatically. So what we can do is say split, and then if we just pass in an empty string, it's going to split it by each of the values here, and that's exactly what we want to do. So let's go ahead and see how that would work. So if we say num.toString, so we first convert it to a string, and then we say .split, and we pass in an empty string, it's going to give us each of those numbers in string form. All right, and then from here, we can basically convert those to numbers and multiply them together. A good way that we can do that is by using the reduce method. So if we chain on one more thing here, we can say reduce, and then we can say the accumulator, which is going to be accumulating that multiplication operation, but we have to pass in a callback function. So we'll put the accumulator and then the actual array item or the number. So maybe we'll just pass in num for number. And then now what we want to do is accumulate, so multiply equal. So it's going to take like whatever that's equal to now, and then it'll multiply that by the new number and store that in the same variable called ACC for accumulator. So we'll just do that multiplied by a number, and we get the answer of 162. All right, so that's our solution here. So if we do 2 times 9 times 9, we get 162, which is our answer here. So this is basically what we're going to do, and we can do it in one step like we've done here, but we can also see it a little bit more clearly if I break it out into steps. So let's go ahead and do that. We've already converted it to a string. Now we want it to be in an array. So we'll say split by an empty string. And then finally we want to get the multiplication value is going to be equal to array version.reduce. And then we of course have our accumulator and our number. And then what we want to return from that callback function is the accumulator multiplied, not added, sorry, multiplied by that number. Okay, so that's our callback function. Multiplication value should get the multiplication of all of them. And then we'll say if multiplication value is less than 10, then we want to return true. So you can already see where this one's going. We can just return multiplication value is less than 10. So if it is less, then we return true. Otherwise, we return false. Now, the problem with this is we have to figure out how many times we have to iterate through this before we get something that is less than 10. So we're not quite done with this solution yet. So this, I believe, is where the recursion comes in, and recursion in coding languages is probably the hardest concept that you could learn. So this one, don't beat yourself up if you don't understand what this is doing fully. This is something that took me a long couple hours early on in my journey to fully understand like how it worked. So don't beat yourself up, but I'm going to show you how I'm going to do this, and hopefully it will actually work so I'm not talking a bunch of nonsense here. All right, so for this solution, I had to turn off the camera. I didn't realize that we'd be dealing with recursion here until I looked at this problem. But a trick that you can use for recursion, and just to kind of explain this code just at a high level, and again, you don't need to understand exactly how it's working because recursion is a very tough subject. But basically what we're doing is we go through this code, which I explained a little bit earlier, and this is going to give us our multiplication value. And then for recursion, where we're calling the function multiple times on itself, you need a stop condition. Okay, so the stop condition is when multiplication value is not greater or equal to 10. So basically in this else return. And what we're doing here when we say return 1 plus the persistence, what it's doing is this is just a trick of recursion. And if you read up on how recursive functions work in JavaScript, you'll see this notation right here. But basically what we're doing is we know that if the stop condition is met, then we return the value of 1. Otherwise, we're going to keep calling the persistence function until we reach that. So if we add 1 to the return value of each iteration or recursion, then we're going to accumulate a total value of how many times we went through this. So again, this is a little bit confusing. It was really confusing to me. I had to brush up on recursion a little bit to solve this problem. But basically, this is, I think, the best solution that you're going to find for this problem. So let's go ahead and attempt it. We passed all of them, so let's see how other people solved it. Maybe there's a way to do this without recursion, but nevertheless, this is probably the most efficient solution. Okay, so actually the first solution might be more simple than what we used here. So this doesn't use any sort of recursion at all. This is simply using the reduce method kind of as we had used. So we did this exact thing. But it's looping through while the num counter is greater than 1. So, and then it uses this times variable to kind of collect the number of times that we've gone through this. This one right here, this is as concise of a solution as you could possibly get. This is basically what we did. It's a little bit syntactically compressed, so you have a lot of little JavaScript tricks going in here, but you can see where we do 1 plus the persistence function, so we're recursing over it. So that would be the most clever solution, as you can see here. But once again, recursion is a very tough subject. I wouldn't expect any beginner that's watching this to really understand how to do that. But of course, you could have solved it this way, which didn't require recursion like I used. Okay, so we're on a 7 KYU problem, which should be a little bit easier. So let's see if that's the case. It says ATM machines allow 4 or 6-digit PIN codes, and PIN codes cannot contain anything but exactly 4 digits or exactly 6 digits. If the function is passed a valid PIN string, return true, else return false. So this one looks pretty easy. We're going to be using regular expressions here. So this is exactly 4 digits. This is 4 digits, but it's alphanumeric, so there's a letter in here, so it's not valid. So this one should be pretty easy. We can go over here to actually look at these regular expressions a little bit. So let's say that we have a string, and the string is 4 digits here, and then we want to match that against a regular expression of some sort. So if we want to do that, we're looking for numbers between 0 or 9, and we want either 4 or 6. So the way we can do that is we can basically, I think we can just wrap this in a parenthesis, and then repeat it with an or. And then instead of 4, we pass in 6 here. So let's see if that works. If we add in 1 more, it should not match it, but if we add in 2 more, it should. No, so that's not working. We could just separate this into multiple regular expressions because I can't remember exactly how to do this for both of them. So in this case, we're looking for any number, so this will exclude letters automatically, in a quantity of exactly 4. And we could be even more specific by saying the start of the line and end of the line with the $sign. And basically, if we're matching this, then we're good. So if we come up with anything here, now if we put in 5 of them, we're going to get an answer of null. So we know that if we get an answer of null, then it's not correct. So let's go ahead and just write 2 regular expressions. So we'll say 4 digits regular expression is going to be equal to what we just wrote here. So let's just paste that in. And then we can come down here and say 6 digits regular expression and just change this right here to a 6. So we're either matching all numbers in a quantity of 4 or all numbers in a quantity of 6. So we can basically return, if both of these are null, that means that we didn't match either of them, so the answer is false. But if either of them are true, so they have they're not null, then we can return true. So let's say we want to return 4 digits regex, and we actually have to match this up against the pin code, so let's do that real quick. So we'll say result 1 equals, and then if you remember, you can take the string pin number. I'm not sure if it is a string. Okay, so it's passed a string value, so we're good. So we'll say pin.match, and then we'll pass in the 4 digits regular expression. And then we might want to look for result number 2 and pass in the 6 digits regular expression. So here's what we can say. We can say return result1.length is greater than 0. Or no, because if it's null, then we don't have an array that we can check that on. So basically we can say if result1 equals null and result2 equals null, then we want to return false. Otherwise, we want to return true because we matched one of them. So null values default to falsy values. So we can actually remove this and say if not result and not result 2. And you can see that it passed. Now we can simplify this even further. So if we say, let's see, if we just return this expression, can't spell. So if we're saying if both of these are equal to null, then we return false. So let's see if that works. It may actually be the opposite. Yeah, so it's going to be the opposite. Let's see. So all we have to do is reverse this by wrapping it in parentheses, kind of reversing the result. And this time it should pass. So this is a decent solution, but I guarantee you there's going to be solutions that are a little simpler than this, where we don't have 2 different regular expressions. There's definitely going to be a solution where we have a single regular expression that checks for both of them, and I'll point that out when we get there. Okay, so this one would be the best one. The \D represents the digits, so that's the same thing as our brackets and then 0 to 9. And you can see that it's doing the same thing that I was kind of trying to do. I must have just messed up part of the syntax there. But it's just testing against this regular expression. So that's basically the best solution, and this is the one I'd recommend using if you had the time to actually figure out how to write the regular expression that covers both cases. Now this is another regular expression. This one should be even easier. because it's 8 KYU. So it says your task is simply to count the total number of lowercase letters in a string. Okay, so let's take one of these complicated ones here and just take it into our little sandbox that we've been using. So I'll paste that into the string and we'll start over with our regular expression. So in this case, we're counting the number of results that we have. So we probably want to pass in the global flag to our regular expression. So put that at the end. And then we want to look for A through Z lowercase letters. And that's basically going to give us our answer, I believe. So if we just pass in A through Z and then we pass in this global, so if we take this off, it's just going to match the first lowercase letter, but if we put it back on, it will give us all of them. So that's pretty much all we're having to do here, and then we just need to count the length of the array. So let's do that. We will just say return string.match, and then we'll pass in lowercase a to lowercase z. We'll pass in the global option, and then we'll return the length of that array. Looks like we failed one of them. So cannot read property length of null. So in this case, there's probably no array that we're getting. Right, so if there's nothing, if there's no lowercase letters, we're not going to get a valid array. And you can see that here. If we were to take out all of these lowercase letters, you're going to get a value of null. So we need to handle that. Instead of just tacking on the length, we have to first check whether it is a truthy value. So let's see how we could do this kind of simply. So we can use a ternary operator to do this. So if we basically say if this is a valid expression, so as long as this does not equal null, then we're going to get put into this part of the ternary operator. So let's go ahead and save the result. So the result is going to be equal to our regular expression evaluation. And then we're going to say if the result is a truthy value, then we're going to return result.length. And otherwise, we're going to return false or something like that. Let's see what it says in the instructions. Okay, so if there's nothing, we want to return 0. So sorry about that. It shouldn't be false. It should be 0. All right, so we passed it this time. Let's just clean that up and attempt it. Cool. So this one was rather simple, a little bit easier than our previous regular expression. And again, as I said in the lesson, you don't need to necessarily know like all of the details about writing regular expressions. It's just good to be able to read them, and that's why I wanted to go through this as an example. So the next one we're doing is going to look at some basic dates. And this one is asking, is the date equal to today? So it says write a simple function that takes a parameter as a date object, or takes as a parameter a date object and returns a Boolean value representing whether the date is today or not. Okay, so this last part is basically just telling us like, hey, there is going to be, the 10th of January and the 10th of February, so you can't just look at the day of the month, which we will look at, but not exclusively. So let's just make a bunch of variables here. So our check day, so this will be the date that we're passed. We can just use the getDate method. That's going to give us the day of the month. All right, so check month is going to be date.getMonth, I believe. We can go to the date methods. So if we go to the MDN documentation, go to built-in objects, and go to date, you'll see that we have the getMonth method, the getFullYear method, and the getDate method. Now you might say getDay, but this is the day of the week, not the day of the month. So we need getDate instead. So this will be day, or this will be month of year, and then this is 0 indexed, so that's important to remember. So January is going to be 0. And then the check year is going to be the date.getFullYear. All right, and then our date today is going to be very similar. So let's just copy all of this code down here. and we'll say today instead of check. And then we'll replace all of this with the actual current date. So today is going to be equal to a new date. That's how we initialize it. And then we can pass this in here in place of the date. So then we just return check day equals today day, and all of the other ones match. So let's just write that out. All right, so it's a little bit of a long expression, but it should work. All right, so we passed it. Now the quickest way to do this, it looks like, is this solution. So what are they doing here? So they're creating a new date, converting it to a date string, and checking if that is equal to the date that was supplied to date string. I actually didn't know that you could do that, because this will give you different times, but I guess it matches if you have different times of the day. So let's just try that real quick in our console just to see if it's true. So we'll set A to a date, and then we'll set B to a date, and then see if B equals A, which is false. So if you go, obviously those are not going to be equal because the value of the date is milliseconds since whatever, January 1st, 1970 at midnight. But if we convert it to string, so toString, and then try it with b.toString, that's going to give you a false value too. So I'm not sure what's going on here. Oh, to a date string. Okay, that's where we went wrong. We're using toDateString, so that should work now. Okay, so that equals true. So let's take a look at that method on our documentation. So it says toDateString, which is not one of them that we covered in our lessons, which is why we didn't use it here. But it says this returns the date portion of the date object. So that's basically going to strip off the time and check if it's the same day. So that's a good solution. Didn't think of that, but that's a lot more concise than what we did. This is what we did. We just checked it up against all of the different methods that we had covered in our lessons. All right, so let's go to the next challenge. And this is alternate capitalization. Given a string, capitalize the letters that occupy even indexes and odd indexes separately and return as shown below. Index 0 will be considered even. Okay, so we're going to return basically two strings for each argument here. The input's always going to be lowercase with no spaces. Okay, to solve this, we first need to get this into an array. So we need string to be into an array, and then we'll capitalize them separately, and then we'll combine them back into a string and assign them to different array values. So how that's going to look, let's see. We will say array is equal to string.split, and we're going to split it by an empty string, which will just separate all of the characters by a comma. All right, so if we just did that and console.logged it, here's what we're going to get. Here's our string right here. So we've got all of each letter broken out, and we know that we have to take this array and we need to capitalize it in two different ways. So we'll just say array1 is going to be string.split, and then we will also have array2. And then we're going to loop through these arrays. So array1 dot for each, and we'll say for each item. Then we also probably want the index because we got to figure out if it's even or odd. And then we'll say array2, but let's not do that quite yet. We'll just figure this one out first. So for array1, we want to check if the index is, we'll say, even. So this will be even capitalization, can't spell here. All right, so if it's even, that would include zeros. So how do we find out if a number is even? Well, we could use the modulus 2 operator. So if we came to our little playground here in the console, and we said, okay, 0 modulus 2 is going to be 0. 1 modulus 2 is going to be 1. 2 modulus 2 will be 0, and 3 modulus 2 will be 1. So basically, anything modulus 2 that returns us with 0 is going to be even. Everything else is going to be odd. So that's all we have to do here. We'll say if the index modulus 2 equals 0, then it's even. And for that case, we'll say array 1 at the index that we're looking at. And then we want to set that to uppercase. Okay, so we've got array 1 completed, and let's go ahead and console.log that and see if we did it correctly. And we didn't do this correctly. I don't know what I was actually thinking here. We already have the array item, so we just need to take the item and make it uppercase, I think. Okay, so we have a problem here. We're trying to modify the actual item, which is not going to modify the original array. I just realized that. So if you go to the array methods and go to JavaScript, built-in objects, and go to array, you're going to see, if we look at the for each method, which is right here, the callback function takes the current value, the index, and the array. So we want to actually grab this third parameter and modify it within our problem here. So we'll pass in the item, index, and then the original array. And in this case, we'll take the original array, we'll pass in the index of that, and then we'll set that equal to the item.toUpperCase. So I believe this one should work now. We'll see. And you'll see that we did capitalize the first, so that's even, lowercase on the second, uppercase on the third. So that should be working, and I believe we did that right, but let's check one time. So capitalize the letters that occupy even indexes. Index 0 will be considered even. Okay, so we did that correctly. So array 1 is done, and then we can basically just do this again for odd capitalization. Change this to array 2. And then instead of saying when it's equal to 0, we'll say when it's not equal to 0. And then we just need to return a final array, and we pass in array 1 and array 2. And I think that should get us to an answer. Maybe we did this in the wrong order. Let's see. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm not doing this correctly. So our arrays are split out into individual letters, so we have to convert those back to strings. So let me do that real quick. Array 1 string is going to be array 1, and then join by an empty string, which will, or actually, yeah, I believe by an empty string, which will join them all together, and then we can do the same thing for array 2 string, pass in array 2, and then we will return those like this and see what we get. Alright, so we passed them this time. Let's just open this up and review what we did. So as you see, we're going to first take these strings and turn them into an array. So if we go back here, if we have some sort of string and then we say split and we use an empty character, it's going to put it all into an array. Then we go and we loop through that existing array with the for each method, and we know that the callback function that we're using is going to pass the item that we're looking at, the index of that item, and then the original array that we can actually modify within that loop. And we knew this because we looked at the documentation here. Otherwise, you probably would have to do just a regular for loop, which acts a little bit different than a for each. So anyways, we are going through and we're asking if the index is modulus 2 equals 0, which indicates it's an even number. And when it equals an even number, we take our original array, we pass in the index into the brackets to grab the item, and we set that equal to the item itself in uppercase form. And then for the odd capitalization, we just basically do the opposite. If modulus 2 does not equal 0, then we want to make it uppercase. Then finally, we join those back together. So if we go to this array here, so we split them into an array, and then if we add join with an empty character, it just joins them back together to the original string, but we've obviously capitalized a few of them in the middle. So we join them back together, and then we just place them in a new array and return that array, and that should give us the answer. Okay, I think this is getting to the end, one of our last ones here, if not the last one. It says, given a number, return the maximum number that could be formed from the digits of the number given. Only natural numbers pass to the function. Numbers contain digits 0 through 9 inclusive. Digit duplications could occur, so also consider it when forming the largest. Okay, so that's a good hint for us to remember. Here's an example. So 3 goes first, 2 goes second, and 1 goes third. That makes sense. That's the maximum number that we could form. Okay. So basically we have to take our number and we have to order it from greatest to least. So I think a good way to do that is we might have to convert it into an array, possibly. So basically what this is asking us to do, if we think about it, all of these numbers are going to be in the descending order, so you have the largest one first. And so basically what this is asking us to do is sort an array, because we know that we can take this number, convert it to a string, and then separate that out into an array. And if we can just sort that array, then we got the answer. But the sort method does not do it correctly when we have numbers here. So let's just type it in to Google. This is just an algorithm, so sort array numerically in JavaScript, and we'll see what the answers are. So it says how to sort an array of integers correctly. And let's see. Okay, so we can just use the sort function. We actually can use it. We have to pass in a callback that will compare the two numbers. So let's see. The sort method takes a compare function. Okay, so I was just reading this incorrectly. So we can take a callback and look at the compare function and return the greatest number. So let's go ahead and do that. Just practice real quick. So let's say that we have an array of numbers, so 2, 6, 3, 1, and we want to sort that. So we will pass in our single num, and then we want to say, let's see, what does it pass into this callback? So let's look. The first element and the second element is what it's going to pass in there. So if we go to our little playground here, it's not just one number, but we'll have the first and second element. And so if the second element is greater than the first, then we'll return true, I believe. So let's see how it did it in the Stack Overflow answer. It says return A minus B, so actually it's the other way around. So if A is greater than B, we return that as true, and then that's going to actually sort our array for us. So let's test that out real quick. We just want to return first minus second, and now we have it sorted in ascending order. I wonder if we take it second minus first. Okay, so that's going to do it in descending order. So we want to do second minus first for our problem here. All right, so the first thing we need to do is get this into a string. So we're just going to try to do this all in one line because it'll help us kind of visualize chaining the methods together. So we're going to return n toString. Okay, so that converts it to a string. And then we want to split it into an array. Now we've got it into an array of numbers here. And then we want to sort it and pass in the first number and second number, and then we want to return second minus first. Okay, and then that's going to give us a sorted array of numbers. So maybe we won't do this. Let's just store this in a result for now, and then console.log that result and see what we have so far. So we'll test that, and you'll see that it prints to the console a descending order of that array. Now we know that we can take an array of numbers and we can actually just combine those together with join. So maybe that's all we need to do. We just, at the end here, so hold on one second. Let's return this again. Or no, let's not do that. Let's keep it in the result, and then at the end here, I'm going to break out for a second, and we can actually put these down onto separate lines. So we'll say dot split, dot sort, and then the last thing that we want to do is we've got it in the descending array, so then we can join it back together as a string, and that's going to give us one big number, and then we need to just convert that to a number, and all we have to do is add a plus sign at the beginning to do that. So now let's see what our result equals. Looks like we're getting the correct number here. So all we have to do is return this result now. So we don't even need to store it in a variable. We can just return it, and let's see how it works. Looks like we passed everything, and again, this is just some indentation. It doesn't really matter how you do this. We're just chaining all of these methods together, and you could certainly have broken that out into separate steps. So let's attempt it. Looks like we passed everything, and see what others use to solve this problem. Okay, so this person did not pass in a sort callback. They just passed in no function whatsoever, and that's going to default to ascending order, as you saw up here. So it says the default sort order is ascending. So here they're going to split it into an array, then they're going to sort it to ascending, then they're going to use the reverse array method to make it descending, and then they're going to join it together and then wrap it in a number, which we did by adding the plus at the beginning of the entire expression. So you can see, I believe, yeah, this one right here is the exact solution that we used. So pretty good. I'm pretty happy with that one. And with that, I think we are done with these problems. Hopefully you learned a little bit. I know some of these were more complicated and challenging than you would expect for a beginner, and certainly when we talked about recursion there for a little bit, that's getting a little bit over the pay grade of someone just starting out. But it is an important topic to explore and kind of understand. It definitely will come up in some sort of coding interview if you're doing those. But yeah, hopefully you enjoyed this. If you care to drop a like on this video, I'd really appreciate it. Subscribe to the channel for future lessons. And hit me up on Twitter. I'm at ZG_dev. Tell me what you thought of this video and how the challenges went for you. All right, so I will see you in the next lesson. I believe that is lesson 7.